And a happy hump day to you, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in here for a look at your extended forecast. Still not much going on forecast-wise, but a couple of notes with today's forecast, and we'll talk about how the temperatures are going to do a little bit of up and down teeter-tottering on the seesaw as we go into the extended portion of your forecast, which is going to be more so moving into the weekend and into the beginning of the new work week next week. So here's a look at your headlines. Another below average day, mainly because of some cloud cover, but we'll talk about all the combining factors that go into creating another below average day with the high temperature later on. Back to the 80s tomorrow. So that's going to be because we get more sunshine in the forecast, and it's going to lead to a pretty drastic warm up, completely skipping the 70s entirely and even making a push towards 90. Could we have a 90 on that 7-day forecast? That's going to be a big question, but your forecast is still going to be mostly dry. So we'll talk about what to expect in the way of rain chances, which is really going to be virtually little to nothing in the way of rain, unfortunately, for our drought conditions, unfortunately for all that pollen that is built up on the hood of your car, but it is going to be very nice for at least getting some outdoor activities in, like, say, the Cherry Blossom Festival, Banana Pudding Festival this weekend, all of those spring festivals that continue to roll on into the back half of the month of March. So no peaks of sunshine, still a gray and a gloomy atmosphere all around the quad. Downtown Macon, we can see that some of these clouds have darker bottoms to them, and that is going to indicate possibly something in the way of a light shower, maybe off in the distance, or that could be present just embedded within this sheet of cloud cover in general. Nice and gray down in Warner Robins, no peaks of sunshine. Same way in downtown Dublin, and then here at the Georgia National Fairgrounds, we take a look over to the west. You can actually see a peak of maybe some blue sky right here on the top of your screen, but overall it's not very substantial whatsoever, and cloud cover is going to hang around for the next couple of hours, I do anticipate, before finally we actually get some sunshine back in the forecast a little bit later on this afternoon. So I did want to turn your attention to the flags over here by the West Gate, where the flags are frozen right now, but they are blowing away from the camera, indicating that there's still a bit of an easterly component with your winds really coming out of the east and the northeast, which you will see on your current temperatures graphic in just 1 second. First things first, as we take a big picture view, you can see this wedge setup. Still not necessarily in full force, I would say, but it is still present in areas to the northeast of us, creating some low 50s, even some 40s, I imagine, all across North Carolina, Virginia, and especially as you make your way up into the mid-Atlantic portion of the country. 53 in Virginia Beach, 51 in Charlotte, and over to the west, it is a very warm environment, kind of giving you an idea about what is going to shift over to the east over the course of the next 24 hours. 70 degrees in Houston, 74 in Laredo, and a trio of 71s across Oklahoma City, Dallas, and down to San Angelo over in western Texas. 76, the warmest number that we spot down in Orlando. But we can see that many areas over to the west of us, even just directly to the west of us, already into the 60s, maybe even flirting with the 70s like Jackson, Mississippi is doing. But down here in central Georgia, we are still holding on to the mid-50s. Good mix of the 50s and the 60s all across the southeast. Most of those 60s, once again, going to be found over to the west into Mississippi and into Alabama. A couple of them down there as you go into Florida, but over to the east and the northeast, that's where we continue to spot the cooler temperatures. 51 in Columbia, 51 in Greenville, another 51 in Athens. So still indicating that these winds are kind of propelling the last little bit of this slightly cooler air mass into the state of Georgia. But even as small scale as this, Columbus over to Macon, we're seeing a difference of about 5 degrees, but also just continuing to reiterate that we are seeing cooler air over to the east and the northeast. But here in central Georgia, these numbers are not too far off what the morning lows were. We got down to the low 50s, the mid 50s in some areas for your current temperatures as you walked outside this morning. Well, we've only gotten an increase into the mid and the upper portion of the 50s, and those upper 50s are going to be found to the west and the southwest, areas that aren't holding on to as much of that slightly cooler air mass up to the north and the northeast. So those temperatures have also not wavered much because of the image that you did just see as we took a walk around the quad. We have some pretty dense cloud cover that is doing a good job of blocking our sunshine. With the absence of sunshine, of course, that radiation is not able to heat the surface like it typically would on a clear and a sunny start to the day. So those numbers might already be in the 70s if we didn't have the cloud cover present. However, that is not the case. That is really kind of halting our warm up for at least the first half of today. But we are anticipating some peaks of sunshine like I alluded to later on, and that's going to lead to at least a more noticeable warming trend as we go into the back half of your Wednesday. In terms of the breeze, it has been very reluctant, very stubborn to really get out of your forecast. It continues to be widespread, but it is once again a light breeze, more so what we had present on Monday as compared to what we saw yesterday, even with some gusts up to 25 and 30 miles per hour. But this light breeze, anywhere from around 5 to maybe 10 miles per hour, not seeing any occasional gusts that are popping up to say 20 or 25 miles per hour. And also, it is worth noting that the yellow shade that we saw on this graphic yesterday has transitioned down into a blue shade. And eventually, when you get no color on that graphic, that's where you really don't have anything in the way of some winds. They have relatively calmed out in nature. So this wedge setup has been slightly reinforcing our cooler, but also our drier air in the forecast. Take a look at your humidity levels, where there's not much to work with here in the state of Georgia. There are some patchy areas of light green back over to the west, and of course down in Florida, where we typically see a more humid environment. But as the wedge setup does fall apart, those winds start to shift direction. We are going to get the cloud cover out of here, and we are going to welcome in a slightly more humid air mass, along with some much warmer temperatures that will be in store for your Thursday and your Friday. Here's your satellite imagery, taking a look from above, where we see some spotty sprinkle showers all across Bibb County. Remember those dark bottoms to the clouds that I was referring to? That's what can be embedded within maybe these widespread overcast skies all across central Georgia. In all likelihood, you're very likely not going to see anything in the way of rain, and it's very likely not going to be significant enough to maybe even wash all the pollen off the top of your car. But you will take any form of rain that you can get, and you can see a lot of those light showers are really scattered about Bibb County, down over here to Twiggs and Houston County, some up there in Monroe County, but not seeing necessarily any clusters that are really, really widespread. So a couple areas in Bibb County getting very lucky with at least some light rain, and that might be the case across many areas of Georgia. But obviously, when we take the big picture view, it is really emphasizing the localized and the isolated nature of anything that is popping up in the way of rain, because you can't get a glimpse of it whatsoever on the satellite and radar picture here across the state of Georgia, big picture view. So it remains a story of the numbers, and let's go ahead and flash back to yesterday. 52 for a morning low temperature. That had a pretty decent chill to it, but we didn't warm up too much into the afternoon, although it still felt mighty amazing, I must say. 69 degrees for a high temperature. We were really close to that average of 73 and really close to the 70-degree mark itself. Your morning low temperature, even though it had a slight chill to it, is actually above your average low of 46 degrees yesterday. So we have continued I kind of have a little bit of a flip-flop with your numbers that we recorded yesterday and compared to your average high and low temperatures, which we have been running above as of recently. Your average low temperature, obviously we definitely went above and beyond that, but your average high temperature, first time that we've fallen below that number in a couple of days, but really one of the only days that we've had throughout the month of March that has fallen short of your average high temperature. 92, the record set back in 1929. The record on Monday was 91 degrees, and we actually were 3 degrees shy of that. We hit 88 degrees for a high temperature, a swing of nearly 20 degrees after the passage of Monday's frontal boundary, and between that high temperature on Monday afternoon into yesterday, and then 27, a record low temperature. We're not looking at any of these temperatures to get below freezing temperature for the next 7 days. However, 27 degrees back in 1968, it is within the realm of possibility to see a pretty substantial cool down at the end of the month of March. Very thankfully, that's not what we're going to have to deal with. Your departure has now gone down to negative 4.26 inches below where we should be at this point of the calendar year. So desperately needing some rain, and we don't really look to have much in the way of that in the cards for your short or for your long-term forecast as we go across the course of the next week. Sunrise yesterday, 7:33. Sunset was at 7:49, getting closer and closer to having an 8 p.m. sunset here in central Georgia. So I did mention that yesterday was the first time in at least a couple of days that we've gotten below average. Last time we were below average was at the end of the stretch of 4 days in a row at the beginning and kind of into the middle of the work week last week. 70 degrees was just 1 degree below the average high of 71. However, it does classify as a below average day in terms of this graphic. And the below average tally, it could use all it can get. 6 days through the entire month that we have been below average with your high temperatures in the month of March, which obviously is in the neighborhood of around a third of what we have seen in terms of above average afternoons. A tally of 17 with the top temperature being 88 degrees. In fact, that temperature of 88 on Monday, That marked the warmest number that we have seen in 2026 so far, but we are going to rival that as soon as the end of the work week this week. We are actually going to look at some potentially near warmest temperatures for 2026, but also maybe even near the 90-degree mark as we close out the work week and before we get into the beginning of your weekend. So here's a look at your hour-by-hour warm-up, which we haven't really seen too much of over the course of the last couple of hours. But as we head throughout the rest of this afternoon, we do see the numbers finally climb up into the mid-60s, eventually touching the upper 60s right there around the tail end of the afternoon. Wouldn't be surprised to see some 68s, some 69s in the forecast later on this afternoon. Even a couple of 70s if you get some clearing in the clouds a little bit earlier than other areas. But if you hold on to the cloud cover for the longest this afternoon, you may not even reach the high temperature of 68 degrees. I'm still forecasting a slightly below average afternoon compared to that average of 73 degrees, but mainly an overcast day because we've continued to see nothing but really gray skies throughout the morning hours. Now as we're transitioning into the afternoon, still holding on to that cloud cover, and we are going to have those spotty sprinkle, maybe even light shower chances that are going to be embedded within the cloud cover. As the cloud cover clears a little bit later on today, that's when we are looking at finally getting some peaks of sunshine, but also getting rid of those isolated rain chances for just a select few spots. East-northeasterly winds, 5 to 10 miles per hour, and then the occasional gust could get up to around 15 miles per hour. Definitely a light breeze kind of a day, not looking near as gusty as what we saw yesterday. And once again, sunrise, 7:32 a.m. is when the sun did rise early this morning. We didn't get a glimpse of that, obviously, with all the cloud cover present, but that continues to get earlier and earlier each day, and eventually it will get back before 7 a.m., and we're going to have a good stretch of probably around a couple of months where the sun is going to rise before the 7 a.m. hour in the morning time frame. So here's a look at future view, a couple hours ahead into the afternoon, right smack dab in the middle of the afternoon as a matter of a fact. You can see these spotty light green shades, maybe even some darker shades of green, a light shower at the very most, but for the most part, you're just going to be dealing with a couple of sprinkles here and there within some of these overcast skies. It does look like the cloud cover tries to break apart, maybe from west to east, kind of the opposite of what we're seeing wind-wise as of early today. And then we'll get into the evening hours, and once again, where those areas are still holding on to the cloudy skies, you do have about a 10 to maybe even 20% chance at the very most of seeing a light rain shower. If you do see clearing in those clouds, then you're not going to be dealing with anything in the way of rain whatsoever for the remainder of today. So we have some partly cloudy skies, more so some mostly clear skies, I would say, as you walk out the door tomorrow morning. A much more beautiful image I do anticipate with kind of the clash of that cloud cover and that first light in the sky, which does create a pretty immaculate image in terms of what to walk out the door to right around 7 a.m. But as we go throughout the day, not really holding on to that cloud cover too much. It will be a mostly sunny afternoon with, once again, about a 10% chance of seeing a light shower or a sprinkle, as indicated by some of these light green dots that are popping up. I have less confidence in seeing anything in the way of those sprinkle or light showers for tomorrow as opposed to what I do have for today. So the 10% is probably a more accurate 10% chance of rain throughout the rest of today as compared to the 10% tomorrow. That's more of a cover the bases 10%, if you know what I mean. So now we go into Friday morning, mostly clear start. And as we go throughout the afternoon, little to nothing in the way of cloud cover, and we're actually not even seeing any of those pop-up sprinkle chances whatsoever as we head into any evening plans that you may have to close out the work week and kind of just get out and enjoy the beautiful weather that we're going to have, because Friday, the evening is actually going to be mighty pleasant because the afternoon is even going to be a warm, dare I even say a hot afternoon with these mostly sunny skies and the drastic warming trend that we do see towards the end of the work week. But I also want to turn your attention to the very end of future view, where we can start to see these winds get gustier and you can start to see where they change direction. So they kind of are coming out of the west as we go throughout the day on Friday, but then overnight Friday into early Saturday morning, that's when we're looking at the breeze to start to change direction, come in out of the north. And in terms of some windy conditions, this is going to indicate a fairly strong frontal boundary. And we will talk a little bit more about that because stronger is going to be a pretty relative term. Is it going to cool the temperatures down? Yes. Is it going to create breezy conditions? Yes. Is it going to bring in drier air? All of the above. Check. But in terms of what we have been doing, it's not going to really act as a cold front per se, especially on the temperature side of things. We're really just going to refer to this as maybe a cool front. We'll talk about when we're actually going to feel that cooler air mass over the course of the next couple of days. In terms of the breezy conditions, just light breeze throughout the rest of today that continues to diminish and subside. Not much in the way of some gusty winds tomorrow, but as we go into Friday, we will look at that light breeze to build back into the forecast. And then here comes that frontal boundary where all of this yellow, even some flashes of some red and some pink begin to filter in from north down to the south. Gusts up to 20, maybe even 25 miles per hour that you can see in areas that have already seen the passage of this boundary, like Atlanta and Birmingham around the midnight hour on Saturday. And as those colors creep farther into central Georgia, you will see that it is going to be a pretty breezy start and a pretty windy start to your Saturday morning plans. Maybe keep that in mind as you are heading out the door. A bit of a bad hair day, but I would anticipate this breeze to stick around throughout most of the day on Saturday after the passage of this frontal boundary that we will see late Friday, really right there around the midnight hour, I would say, Friday into Saturday. So in terms of the next 3 days, we haven't dipped down to the 40s as of yet. So we've had that slight chill in the air. But again, your average low temperature sits around 46, 47 degrees this time of year. So these numbers are all still going to be above that average low. So it definitely could be a whole lot cooler. 68 for a high temperature throughout your Wednesday. That's up to 82 tomorrow. So like I said, completely skipping the 70s, already soaring back up into the 80s. And if that's not warm enough for your liking, 88 degrees for a high temperature as we go into Friday afternoon. That's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of getting to around, I believe, 15 degrees above your average high of 73 degrees. And then your morning low temperature gets back up into the mid, maybe even the upper 50s as you walk out the door on Friday. And by the time we close out the work week on Friday, we're actually getting rid of these 10% chances of rain. We are going to keep those in the forecast throughout Wednesday and Thursday. Once again, just to really cover the bases tomorrow, but I'm anticipating a mostly sunny to about a partly cloudy afternoon throughout your Thursday. And then Friday, definitely forecasting a mostly sunny day. In fact, it could be entirely sunny with just maybe a few specks of white that will be out there in the afternoon sky. So your allergy monitor, with the lack of rain chances, this is going to remain unchanged over the next 3 days, over the next 7 days. Tree and grass pollen are going to continue to run rampant, and we've had some of our highest pollen counts so far over the last couple of days. That will continue, especially those days where we have some warmer temperatures in the cards. The temperatures were a little bit lower yesterday, forecasted to be a little bit lower today. So the pollen isn't going to be necessarily as bad as it could, but over Thursday and Friday, it is definitely not going to be a good sign whatsoever. And tree and grass pollen, once again, those are going to be the two kind of drivers of all the sniffles and sneezes that you are feeling. And I can attest to it. I was driving around with the windows down yesterday afternoon. I had a bit of a scratchy feeling in my throat. So obviously make sure that you're continuing to take that allergy medication and take it early, even if you're not feeling the symptoms, because it's going to help combat all of those allergy symptoms if you do start taking your Allegra and you start taking your Claritin as of right now, before the allergies could get bad over the next couple of days into the weekend and into the beginning of next week. But if you're more susceptible to maybe your allergy symptoms flaring up with ragweed or maybe something in the way of mold, we're not going to really have to worry about that, especially mold, which typically peaks after we get a rain event. Well, we don't really have much in the way of rain. If you do catch one of those spotty sprinkles or isolated showers, the mold levels might be up for a brief moment, but I'm not anticipating it to be too long of a term in order to really have any much impact whatsoever. So once again, tree pollen for the most part, but also the grass pollen levels are higher than they normally are for this time of year. So let's go into the long-range models. Let's pick up where we left off with short-range future view, and that's going to be with the passage of that frontal boundary, really getting into around the midnight time frame, Friday into Saturday. And we can see that maybe the GFS is trying to pick up on a little bit of some spotty showers out ahead of this frontal boundary. Well, I do believe that as we go into that cooler time of the day, that overnight time period into early morning, it's number one, not going to have the warmer temperatures to work with, but also we're not really going to have a lot of humidity in the forecast. We'll get a little bit back just in general for the warming trend that we will see today into Friday, but it's not going to be enough to sprout widespread rain chances like you do see out ahead of this frontal boundary, like after it crosses off the coast and moves out into the Atlantic Ocean. There's obviously plenty of moisture to work with as you go across the ocean. That's why you do see this definitive line of some organized rain out ahead of that frontal boundary, but that's not going to pertain to you, like we said, unless you're going on a deep sea fishing excursion sometime around midday on Saturday off the coast of Savannah, off the coast of Jacksonville, or you are walking your dog out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, which I don't think any of you are going to be doing. Now let's go into Sunday. Once again, a mostly clear and a dry forecast. After this frontal boundary passes through, we're getting that cooler and we're getting that drier air, and that drier air is dominating your forecast all the way into the beginning of next week. Even as I play it all the way out into Tuesday into Wednesday, we're still not seeing any signs of a frontal boundary or anything that is going to produce widespread rain chances. Maybe areas up near the Great Lakes are going to get some form of a weather system that could even bring severe weather up there, but that's not of concern down here in our neck of the woods. The quiet stretch of weather does continue to roll on. So I'm not kidding when I really say it's cruise control weather, maybe with a little bit of temperature fluctuation, because that's the only thing worth noting besides the rampant levels of pollen, which I don't really want to talk about all day long. We will talk about how it feels outside. And obviously the springtime, you can have moments that are going to feel a little bit like winter, and then you can have some moments that are, say, feeling a little bit like an early summer forecast. We saw that as recently as Monday, and it does appear that we are looking to see that once again on Friday with a high temperature of 88 degrees that very likely could start to flirt with 89 or 90 as a high temperature as we go into the end of the work week. 68 for a high temperature today. If we hit 68 today or we hit 69 just like we did yesterday, that is a temperature increase of nearly 20 degrees, but also just kind of returning back to where we started the work week at. We had a high temperature of 88 on Monday, and then we saw the drop down into the upper 60s. So we dropped down nearly 20 degrees, and it looks like we are going to get a very quick warm up of 20 degrees to get back into those upper 80s by the end of the work week, indicating that these frontal boundaries that have come through, they are going to be pretty strong and pretty noticeable in nature. They're just not typically sending us that widespread rain that we do normally see ahead of a frontal boundary, like we have seen with our severe weather systems as of recently. But that is also going to be some good news and a welcome trade-off. We're not dealing with anything in the way of severe weather, but we definitely could use our fair share of some rain. It's just kind of double-edged sword. Just kind of pick your poison. Which do you want? Do you want the conducive outdoor weather or outdoor plans weather, or do you want something in the way of maybe some hydration for the backyard garden? Maybe don't have to run the sprinklers and during those overnight hours as frequently. Well, that's what our forecast is going to entail. But the good news is also about seeing temperatures, say, with highs in the upper 60s, maybe the low half of the 70s, or even getting into the 80s. It's kind of giving everyone a little bit of what they want. If you are a fan of this early preview of summer, then Thursday and Friday, it's going to be your cup of tea. If that's a little bit too warm for your liking, you want to wait until we get into April, maybe May, and start feeling some of those warmer temperatures, Saturday and Sunday are going to be your days to get outside with plenty of sunshine in the forecast and temperatures that are around where they should be. 74 and 73, your average high temperature is nestled right in between those two values at 73 degrees. So humidity day by day, I did mention that obviously we need our fair share of this in order to kind of maybe sprout some widespread rain chances. And we get a little bit of an uptick into Thursday and Friday, but not a really noticeable uptick. We would really need these dew point temperatures to get up into the 60s and the 70s in order to sprout a line of continuous showers, maybe even continuous storms. But with the passage of our frontal boundary Friday into Saturday, it just drops the humidity levels back down for the rest of the weekend before they try to rebound into the beginning of next week. But still, those humidity levels are looking even lower than what we do have over the course of your Thursday and of your Friday. In terms of your morning low temperatures, I did refer to at least some time frames after the passage of this next frontal boundary going to feel that cool down a little bit more than others. So we have been on the slightly chilly side of things, and I think tomorrow morning going to be very similar to this morning. And then we'll get an increase into the mid-50s to walk out the door on Friday and Saturday. But then we get the drop down into the low 40s as you walk out the door on Sunday morning. Definitely plan on having the light layering ready to go as you make your way out the door for church service, maybe running some early morning errands on Sunday. That is looking to be the only day in the next 5 days that we will be below average of 47 degrees for that morning low. But I actually do anticipate it to continue for one more day. Some near average low temperatures on Monday morning. And yes, near average is obviously not necessarily cool for this time of year, but given how warm that we've been recently and even over the last couple of days, we haven't even dipped into the upper 40s. I definitely guarantee that you're going to feel some of those lower and some of those mid 40s on Sunday and Monday morning, more so than what we have been feeling the last couple of days. But the good news is the warm-up is very quick. Once again, we are into the upper 70s on Monday and low 80s, getting back to that regularly scheduled programming with the stretch of 80s that we will have for the back half of the work week next week. And next Tuesday, go ahead and throw it. Well, I guess you'll probably already see it on your calendar. That's going to be the last official day of the month of March. And then we will go into Wednesday, which will be April 1st. And then as we go into next weekend, that is going to be Good Friday. And then that is going to be Easter Sunday a couple days after that. So getting into the 5th of April and the beginning of April is marking kind of a time frame where, of course, we get out of this stretch of some slightly cooler temperatures. We really start to settle into more of that typical spring forecast. But overall, I think March has kind of been some textbook spring weather outside of a couple of days where we've seen a pretty substantial cool down. But in terms of the early preview of summer, that's going to be present for your Thursday and Friday after we get through one more below average day, courtesy of the overcast skies and a little bit of that wedge holding on as the wedge falls apart. As the cloud cover clears, we get more sunshine and we get a warmer pattern that settles in for the end of the work week before our frontal boundary passes through between Friday and Saturday. Just knocks the numbers back down to close to average. I wouldn't even doubt that these numbers could get a little bit lower for your Saturday and your Sunday afternoon high temperatures. And it's a pretty substantial cool down. We're still talking about a cool down of maybe around 15 degrees with those high temperatures and somewhere in the neighborhood of the same drop with your morning low values. But just given how warm we're going to be on Friday afternoon, it's not necessarily a cool down that we are going to really notice, because these numbers, yes, they are pretty close to average, but they are going to be a good deal cooler than what you feel on Friday afternoon. So kind of, like I said, just that weather that satisfies just about everyone's taste. If you do like the very warm temperatures flirting with 90, we have that in store. If you do like temperatures closer to average, we also have that in store. And we have one last day below average if you are very reluctant to let go of that last little bit of the winter chill possibly throughout the rest of today. But obviously high temperatures in the upper 60s, still feeling pretty pleasant, and you're definitely still feeling the warmth, especially once we get some sunshine back in the cards. And speaking of that extended period of your forecast, April 1st through the 7th, it is looking like we're kicking off the month of April with a very good probability of seeing some above normal numbers. I wouldn't doubt that that first week of April, we probably do make a push to the 90-degree mark, the first time that we would do so in 2026. A little bit earlier than my liking personally, but hey, I'll take it. This warmer weather has honestly put me in a much better mood just walking outside on the daily basis. That warm air just kind of comforting you and not having to wear all those winter layers has been a nice feeling as of the past weekend, and hopefully we continue to have that. But it does look like we have signs of some more weather makers in the form of some rain chances that are creeping close. We can see these shades of green, which are going to indicate slight probabilities of above normal rainfall. They're over to the west for that period of April 1st through 7th, but as we go day by day into the future, say April 2nd through the 8th, April 3rd through the 9th, I anticipate these green shades to shift over towards the east, because that's the general direction that most of our weather makers do come from west to east across the United States here. So hopefully some signs of some changes to your forecast, but until then, it just remains a very quiet forecast with some days feeling warmer than others and little to nothing in the way of rain chances besides a very, very low chance of seeing a sprinkle or a light shower in the forecast. So hopefully you get through the rest of today, soak up whatever sunshine we have towards the tail end of the afternoon. Then we'll welcome back that sunshine in full force Thursday and Friday. And make sure if you're spending an extended period of time outside with all this sunshine, you are continuing to lather up in that sunscreen, and you are continuing to make sure that you're taking some breaks and hydrating. It's been a while since we've seen some warm temperatures. We've obviously seen our fair share of 80s, but if we have 90s in the future, you're going to want to make sure that you are hydrating and that you are taking breaks in the shade, because your body isn't used to feeling that kind of warmth that we haven't seen since maybe, say, last September or getting into last August in nature. So that's going to do it for your extended forecast. I know, quiet stretch of weather again. The weather team is kind of kicking our feet up as of right now, but we'll continue to provide you with updates on what you need to know, because it is still severe weather season. So we're obviously keeping our eyes ahead to what could be the next severe weather maker, but still no signs of that on the horizon. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow at 11 a.m.